You don't remember the moment you first understood that no meant something different than yes. You don't remember the first time a stranger's face made you cry, or the first time your own mother's face made you stop crying. You don't remember learning your name, or realizing that the sound coming out of your mouth was actually connected to you. And yet all of it happened. You were there. You were awake, alert, soaking in an entire universe of new information every single second. Then, somehow, it disappeared. Almost everyone's memory starts around age 3, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes later, but the years before that are essentially blank. Not fuzzy, not dim, gone. So where exactly does it all go? This isn't ordinary forgetting. You don't forget your childhood the way you forget a phone number. This is something much stranger. A near total wipe of the earliest and arguably most important stretch of your entire life. For decades, scientists didn't have a great explanation for it. Now they actually do, and the answer touches nearly everything about how your brain works. Let's start with the question everyone eventually asks. Was there even anybody home back then? Were you actually experiencing the world, or just kind of existing in some PI conscious fog? The research is clear on this. You were absolutely there. Babies aren't blank slates quietly waiting for life to start. They're constantly reacting, learning, forming preferences, and responding emotionally almost from the moment they're born. A newborn just hours old can pick its mother's voice out from a room full of strangers. Within days, infants start showing likes and dislikes about faces, sounds, and smells. Something inside them is clearly awake, clearly processing, clearly feeling. So the mystery isn't whether you were conscious. You were. The mystery is why none of it left a trace you can access. To understand that, you need to understand what memory actually is, and this part surprises most people. Your brain doesn't record experiences the way a camera records video. There's no single file being saved somewhere labeled third birthday party. Instead, different parts of an experience get scattered across different regions of the brain. The emotional weight of a moment goes one direction. The sensory detail goes another. The sequence of events, the actual storyline of what happened gets handled somewhere else entirely. For all of that scattered information to become one coherent memory you can later pull up and say, I remember this, it needs to be stitched together. That stitching job belongs to a structure called the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's filing system, the part responsible for binding fragments of experience into something whole and retrievable. Without a properly functioning hippocampus, an experience can still affect you. It can still leave an emotional mark, but you won't be able to consciously recall it as a memory. And here's the key detail. In infants, the hippocampus is nowhere close to finished. The basic hardware exists, but the dense web of connections needed to file and retrieve memories efficiently simply hasn't been built yet. That construction process takes years, stretching well into early childhood, and, in some areas, even further. Trying to store a memory with an infant hippocampus is a bit like trying to save a video file with no storage drive plugged in. The recording is technically happening, but there's nowhere for it to land. That explains part of the puzzle, but not all of it. Because by age 2 or 3, the hippocampus is considerably more developed, and yet most people still can't remember much from that age either. So there has to be more going on, and there is. The second piece of the puzzle is something called neurogenesis, which is just a fancy way of saying your brain is constantly producing brand new neurons. This was once thought to be impossible after infancy, but scientists now know new neurons keep forming throughout life, especially in the hippocampus. Here's the twist though. During early childhood, this neuron production is happening at an almost absurd rate compared to any other point in your life, and every one of those new neurons needs to find its place in the existing network, wiring itself in and often disrupting whatever connections were already there. Picture trying to keep a library perfectly organized while workers are constantly bolting new shelves onto the walls, moving sections around, and rearranging everything on a near daily basis. Good luck finding last week's book. That's essentially what's happening inside a toddler's hippocampus. The same explosive growth that makes early childhood the fastest learning period of your entire life is also the reason nothing from that period sticks around as a retrievable memory. You were absorbing information faster than you ever will again, and the price of that speed was the inability to file any of it away permanently. Now for the third piece, and this one tends to surprise people the most. Language. It seems obvious enough on the surface. Babies don't have words, so of course, they can't form memories they'd later describe in words. But the connection runs much deeper than simple vocabulary. The kind of memory that makes up your sense of personal history. That this happened to me variety is tightly bound up with your ability to construct a narrative. When you recall something from your past, you're essentially telling yourself a small story with a beginning, a middle, and you as the main character. That storytelling ability doesn't exist yet in early infancy because it depends on language as its scaffolding. Without the words to build a narrative, there's no way to frame an experience as something that happened to a continuous you moving through time. Researchers have found this pattern across cultures and even among children who grew up using sign language instead of speech, suggesting it isn't really about spoken words specifically, but about language as a mental tool for organizing experience into a personal story. No story, no narrator. No narrator. Nobody to hang the memory on. So you've got three forces working together here. An unfinished hippocampus, a flood of new neurons disrupting the filing process, and the absence of language to structure experience into something rememberable. All three overlap during those first few years, creating this strange window of near total amnesia over what is, in many ways, the most transformative period of your life. But here's the part that really deserves your attention. Just because you can't remember those years doesn't mean they didn't shape you. In fact, they might have shaped you more than any other period since. The bonds you formed with the people who raised you, whether you learned early on that the world responds when you're in distress or that comfort isn't guaranteed, none of that got stored as a memory you can replay. It got stored as something else entirely, an underlying expectation, a kind of emotional default setting that quietly runs in the background of your adult life. If you were consistently soothed as an infant, your nervous system likely absorbed the lesson that distress passes and help shows up. If comfort was unpredictable, a different lesson got baked in instead. You'll never recall the specific moments that taught you these things, but you're carrying the conclusions around every single day. Psychologists separate this into two categories: explicit memory, the kind you can consciously describe, and implicit memory, the kind that lives in your reflexes, your gut reactions, your assumptions about relationships and safety. Infantile amnesia wipes out the explicit stuff almost completely, but it leaves the implicit stuff fully intact. You lost the footage. You kept the conclusions. There's also a strange twist worth mentioning here. Some of the earliest memories people swear they have are probably not real memories at all, but reconstructions built from old photos and family stories repeated so many times that the brain eventually files them alongside genuine experience. Once that happens, they feel completely real, indistinguishable from an actual memory, even though what you're really recalling is a story about yourself rather than a direct trace of the event. Interestingly, how early someone's memory kicks in isn't random. Culture plays a role. Families who regularly talk with young children about past experiences, asking questions and encouraging them to recall details, tend to produce kids with earlier and richer autobiographical memories. Emotional intensity matters too. Frightening or highly charged moments sometimes leave behind vague physical or emotional echoes long after the actual story is gone, which is part of why some people feel unexplained anxiety in certain places without knowing why. And then there's sleep, which might be the most overlooked piece of all. Infants sleep an enormous amount, and a huge portion of that sleep is spent in an active, heavy state where the brain works to consolidate everything it's absorbed that day. Researchers now believe this isn't wasted time at all, but the process of building foundational skills rather than storing specific memories. Learning to recognize faces, understanding that objects still exist even when you can't see them, picking up the rhythm of language itself. None of that gets stored as a memory you ever recall, because it's being converted into raw capability instead of narrative. So what does all this actually mean for you today? It means the years you can't remember weren't wasted. They were foundational. They built the architecture your entire personality now runs on, from how you handle stress to what instinctively calms you down. You can't audit those years or go back and examine them directly, and that might feel unsettling. But it also means you're not locked into a fixed story about your earliest self, because there is no story to begin with. The patterns laid down back then aren't permanent sentences. They're starting points, and starting points can shift with new experiences, safe relationships, and enough evidence over time that things aren't the way your infant brain once concluded they were. You lost the memories. What they built is still standing,